Hi, again, I'm Howard Holton, and this is another episode of Discovering Disruptions in Tech. We are here at Hacker Summer Camp in sunny 112 degree Las Vegas, Nevada for B-Sides, Blackhat, and DEF CON. You're likely watching this after this event has closed, but we want to bring you some insights and some smart people that are here. And this week, I'm here with Marshall from DTEX. How's it going, Marshall?
Howard, thank you first of all for having me. This is my 20-something as Blackhat. I've lost count, but I've been here so many times. I always love coming. I think Vegas is a wonderful place to be and enjoy the hacker community and just the business community. So happy to be here and I love being on the show.
Yeah, I think Hacker Summer Camp is a blast. I do not come for Vegas in any way, shape, or form, but any opportunity to meet the people that I really get to talk to virtually and sometimes only via text prompt is just wonderful.
And there's nothing like walking around and running into people that you haven't seen in a couple of years, right? Or like you said, people you have connections with but haven't met in person or haven't seen in person. And these conversations just happen randomly and normally here that tells you go to it. It's fantastic.
There's people I've had like run up and give hugs to people that I just don't get to see. Mm-hmm. Ever, because this is the only time we're in the same place at the same time. Some of them I lived 15 minutes from, and we just never, ever got the ability to see each other except at Blackhat.
This is one of those events that people just don't miss. They're gonna come because it's Blackhat and stuff.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and they get to see 100 people. Exactly. I don't know anybody that's been here as long as we have, and you may have been coming here a little longer than I have, that don't see 100 people.
Exactly. At least.
Right. Yep. At least. Right, it's kind of crazy the number of people we get to see. So I think this is the 23rd year of Blackhat and the 32nd year of DEF CON.
Wow,
it's crazy. It makes me feel old, doesn't it?
I was just going to say, you realize we're old, right?
I mean, I remember when it was at the Riv. I remember when it was at the freaking hotel. I cannot remember. What was the first hotel that it was at forever?
Blackhat, I don't remember. DEF CON, I remember Alexis Park.
That's the one, Alexis Park.
Forget the tents.
Oh, God.
Remember, you used to have to go a talk or two earlier from the talk you wanted to listen to because you'd just be standing in line and probably drinking in the heat, just waiting to get in. By the time you got in, you almost didn't want to hear the talk because you were so exhausted from being out the whole time.
Well, and the talk that you wanted to go in would fill up, so you'd go into the talk before the talk. The weird part was, almost invariably, the talk that I thought I wanted to go into was less interesting than the talk I walked before the talk. I got exposed to so many unique and interesting talks because of that. Like, I never would have sat through car hacking, as an example. It didn't apply to me. But my God, was that interesting. I learned more about the dark web from sitting in talks that I had no interest in than I ever thought possible. It was so much fun.
Absolutely, yeah. And you do, you reminisce about those days and you miss those days because now it's a bit more of a formal event. If you look at it, it's a better run event. You can actually learn more now, but it was just, back then it was, so nascent.
For sure. Well, it was personal.
Personal is a better way to say it.
Right, it was personal. And it's become a little big now and a little popular. It feels like Comic-Con.
Yeah.
Right. It didn't feel like Comic-Con before.
Right.
Right. Or it felt like early Comic-Con when we were actually there to trade comics versus whatever it is now, a media event. Right. It feels like a media event. It's still a tremendous amount of fun though. I still try not to miss it.
Yeah, that's why we're here.
Right. Yeah. Right. So you deal a lot with the human side of threat. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
We were talking a little bit about kind of insider threat and what that means. So let's actually talk about that for a minute. Like, what is insider threat? What is outsider threat? Just to keep the parallel going, even though I wouldn't necessarily call it that. And like, what are some of the intricacies of that we should be thinking about today?
Sure. So and to give a little bit of background on me first, because I think it's important to understand why I look at insider risk, insider threats the way I do. I spent 17 years at Mandiant, so I was entirely on the external side, looking at external hackers and foreign governments trying to break into organizations. Did that for a long time, absolutely loved it. But then what I recognized about a year ago is that the insider space was just not as well funded. It probably could be disrupted. It's something that when you talk to CISOs, they will say it's in their top 3 priorities, sometimes their top 5 priorities, but it's not funded at the same level, right? It's not funded like you expect it to be in that. So I look at this and say, well, you know what? That's a really interesting space that I can sink my teeth into. I'm a very mission-focused person, so that's a mission I'm excited about. It's still security for organizations. It's just securing them from a threat that's not as popular, not as well known as what you see on cybersecurity and external threats. So that's really my lens of coming into this. I look at it as the other side of the cybersecurity coin, right? And when you have that coin as a whole, that is, your not really your risk program, but that's a comprehensive security program for an organization. So when I think about an insider, I think about it. There's three different types really. There's your malicious insider or intentionally malicious insider, someone who does something bad because they want to. Maybe they're bribed, maybe they're extorted, maybe they're leaving the company, want to steal information, something like that. There's your negligent user. This is the well-meaning user who does something that is against policy or does something he doesn't know is wrong or just simply makes a mistake, right? And there's the compromised user. So someone who is not malicious on his own, but his identity is being used maliciously in the organization by an external hacker. So from my perspective, external threats, anyone that's outside of the company. Internal threats are your internal employees. They can be negligent, they can be malicious, or they can be compromised. And where this gets really interesting, there's lots of examples we could talk about, but a couple of them that have been on the news that I think are a little bit less well known than something as obvious as, I went and stole a bunch of data and took it out of an organization. You've probably seen the articles on the North Koreans trying to get hired as IT workers, right? So that's fascinating. So now organizations not only have to worry about internal threats and external threats. Now they have people that are trying to get hired as quasi-legitimate employees that, in at least the know before case, implanted malware right away, right? So that's obviously a huge threat right there. Other insiders may get hired, not implant malware, but try and surreptitiously steal data, right, using a low and slow approach. Other ones may just be an employee who's not going to do a good job because they don't really, it's not really a job they want. They're just forced to have it. They're giving some of their pay to the government they're working for. But again, that's not the type of employee you want at an organization.
Sure.
Well, those are insider threats, and it's a huge problem that we're only now just starting to recognize and pay attention to.
Sure. There's also, it's very, very, very common that you'll hire someone from an outsourced company where the person that you interviewed is not the person that shows up. Right? That's another case of, I have 6 experts, I have 600 people. I need to find a home for 594 of them that are not the 6 experts. The 6 experts are just going to interview, right? Kind of the same thing. What category would you place that into?
So I would place them in malicious insiders.
Okay.
Now, honestly, it's a great question. One I haven't thought through. As I was saying, I was I need to really think about how to categorize this, or is it a new category we haven't talked about? But the reason I would categorize them as malicious is because they're doing something they know to be false, right, or something they know to be harmful to the company. Now, a foreign government who is implanting an employee in the company for any reason, that's a malicious employee. They're not really working for you as an organization. For sure. They're working for somebody else, right?
For sure. I almost think the fourth is like fraudulent intent.
Fraudulent intent.
Right.
And that's a good way of saying it because, outside of this foreign government implanting people, you also have situations now where people are getting hired at 2 different companies, so they're just not working very hard, right?
Right.
They may be trying, but they're not giving you their full attention.
Right.
Or worst cases, which, and we see this a lot, someone will go and get hired at 10 different companies, and they'll farm their job out to someone from another country who may be trying to do the job, but now as an organization, you have employees having access to your system that you don't know anything about them. Right. You don't know what their intent is.
You haven't done a background check, you haven't vetted them, you haven't vetted their location, maybe you have specific restrictions on where you can hire, right, that have now been violated without your knowledge.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of these, at least the ones that are more commonly read about in the news, they're all engineering and IT jobs.
Right.
Those are not jobs where you want to have people that you don't trust. Right. Just think the amount of damage and harm that can be done to a company if their IT organization gets infiltrated or their engineering team gets infiltrated.
And the trust is a topic that keeps coming up in this podcast and the other podcasts that I'm on, because frankly, we do a terrible job of it. Trust is a human-to-human thing. Right? Hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution and societal evolution have made trust a human-to-human thing and really built that deep into our psyche. For us to apply that to systems is weird. For us to apply that to organizations is weird. For us to apply that to anything that's not a person that we know is weird. And I think we need to really start taking an active role in thinking about what is trust does trust mean to us, how do we build it, how do we measure it, how do we lose it, and how do we rebuild it? And I think all of this kind of plays into that. It's interesting because cybersecurity for so long has been very specifically about external threats, where insider threats were something that legal handled, something that HR handled, and they're becoming more and more of a cybersecurity issue.
Nowadays, they absolutely are. If you think about almost any cloud-based or SaaS application-based compromise, right, there was a credential that was used. You can think of, I hate to name victim organizations, but it's just easier by example, so I'll name Snowflake, right? They had an incident, and attackers were able to leverage credentials to their customers to gain access to their data. That right there, some people would say, well, that's an insider threat. I'd argue it's not. There's an external entity doing it, but they were using credentials that have been issued to an insider, to a person, right? So to your point about that, losing that human-to-human trust factor, if you think back, hundreds of years ago, trust was entirely built upon personal interactions, right? You and I are talking, we establish some trust. I know you, you know me. Nowadays, we're in a situation where you hire someone you've never actually met. You're on Zoom calls. Now we've seen where people can use artificial intelligence to fake an entire Zoom call and make their appearance look different. So you can't even necessarily trust the person that you think you see. Organizations are going to have to start doing things like having prospective employees come into an office so they can be personally verified as to who they are. So you have that human trust. And then to make it even a little bit worse, even if I trust you, even if I trust you and we're working at the same company, but your account gets compromised, now I can no longer trust your account because it's doing things I wouldn't normally expect you to do. If an organization doesn't have a cybersecurity program or an insider threat program dedicated to looking at that type of activity, they might just make an assumption that you, Howard, are malicious because you're taking these actions.
For sure.
They're going to go after you, right? But when you have a program that's geared towards looking at insider threat or a very mature cybersecurity program that understands that there's a human element, they're going to try and look at the context. Like, well, what happened? Well, all of a sudden, Howard's account started logging in at 1 a.m. He doesn't normally do that, right? Maybe this isn't Howard. I mean, it's a very simple example, but it's the context around that activity that really matters when you're dealing with humans.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's also interesting that you said hundreds of years ago, single-digit years ago. This is a single-digit year
fair.
change.
That's fair.
Right? Pre-COVID, most of the time we met people. Most of the time they worked from an office, right? Fully remote was a rare thing, right? So like, let's be really clear. This is a really, really, really new thing that we've enabled, right? If we say within IT, remote work has always been a little more acceptable and a little more commonplace because we've had a resource constraint. It's not older than 20 years.
That's
right?
fair.
You really didn't have a significant percentage of remote software developers and remote IT people pre-2000, the early aughts, right? So this is not something that humans have evolved to deal with. This is not something that society has evolved to deal with. This is not something that business operations has evolved to deal with. This is something that we have more or less had thrust upon us that we now need to really get our arms wrapped around.
And it's interesting when you talk to, like obviously in my job now, I talk to a bunch of people in the government whose job it was to do counterintelligence and things like that, where they look at this and say, well, this is not a new problem, right? Like, insider threats are not a new thing. We've been dealing with this, for years and years and years. It's just only becoming new to us, to the general public or the wider public, right? I look at that as like, in cybersecurity, I remember back when I first started at Mandiant in 2006, I would have to sit down with the organization and explain to them like why they should care, right? Yes, this actually happens. Yes, nation states are actually trying to break into your environment. Yes, they're trying to steal data. Like, you had to have that conversation.
Right.
And over the course of time, right now, you don't have to have the conversation anymore.
For sure.
Everyone knows what APTs are. Everyone knows what's going on. But for me, like, one of the watershed moments was when Target was breached, because that was the breach where other breaches had been in the headlines as well. But that's when my mom called me and
right.
She said, "What do I have to know about this? Should I be worried?" And so, like, at that point in time, it was brought to the masses, the mainstream. When you look at insider threats, obviously there's the Robert Hansen and the Edward Snowden cases, which are probably two of the most famous and most people can name them. But I believe, like, when both of those cases happened, that was viewed as a government problem. That wasn't a company problem. That's a government problem.
For sure.
It doesn't really affect us. It affects them over there. But now what you're seeing, in late 2023, I believe it was, Tesla came out and said they had an insider steal information. Google came out a couple months ago and said they had someone steal information around artificial intelligence and so forth. So now companies are starting to go more public with it. Before went public with the North Korean IT situation. So as these headlines are occurring and it's becoming more public knowledge, I think we're going to see more people interested in the discipline, and we'll start to see insider threat becoming more of a conversation piece or topic piece with traditional cybersecurity folks, with business leaders, and with executives, because they're going to recognize that there is a risk here.
For sure. For sure.
For me, I want to see it get elevated to the board level, because the moment insider threat becomes either its own category or part of cybersecurity, and the conversation is escalated to the board level, at that point in time, you know that this is a conversation that businesses are having around how they view risk. And at that point in time, from my perspective, that's the right way for a business to look at the situation. Insiders, they're bad, but they're part of a holistic risk strategy that the company needs to get their arms around.
I would agree. I think one of the challenges, though, we talk a lot about identity management. One of the problems is that's as complex as creating a unique fingerprint for every human being, right? That is an enormously complex thing to do, and to do to a level where you've effectively eliminated the noise, right? You can generate a tremendous amount of noise with a poorly done identity management program, and what you really don't want to do is falsely accuse employees of anything that could impact their job or their reputation, right? You really, really, really have to be cautious about that. You open yourself up for liability, and that's a pretty strong lawsuit if you falsely accuse someone of being a malicious insider, right? Even a negligent insider can have a lasting effect on someone's reputation and thus their career and their lifetime earnings, and you can be on the hook for that, right? So you still have to be cautious about what you do, how you launch these things, how you handle them. So do you have any thoughts or comments or recommendations even on how to manage this?
I do. I would take it one step farther too and say it's not just the legal ramifications of these type of issues with your employees, but organizations want to be able to trust their employees, and employees want to be able to trust their employers that they have their best interest at heart. And so if you have some type of big brother monitoring situation that is too intense and too critical and falsely accusing people and going on witch hunts and things like that, you're going to have a a very poor culture. It's going to be an environment people aren't going to want to work in. They're going to fear for their job or fear that they do something wrong, and that's not a situation that's beneficial to anyone. Companies won't have talented people won't want to work there. So what you really want to find is that perfect intersection between privacy for the employees and risk tolerance for the organization. Because obviously an organization needs to be able to say, you're doing something bad, we need to take an action on this, or you're doing something that's risky, we need to come and educate you why you shouldn't do that and help rehabilitate you, if you will, so that you're contributing to the company. What you don't want to do is say, I'm monitoring what everyone is doing at all times, and so when you're doing something wrong, I can come out and find you, right? You want to make sure that our employees can have that trust that malicious employees will be handled, but everyone else is safe, if you will. Safe's not the right word, right? But their privacy is intact. Sure. They don't have to worry.
So is one way to do that our identity fingerprinting systems, right? Those things that are looking for anomalies. Would a good way to do that be have a system that does some pseudonymization so that the administration side only sees like a GUID rather than an actual user account?
Yeah.
So you can't attach it to a person until a flag is raised, it gets escalated, and then a different department takes a look at that and says, hey, I'm the investigator rather than the watcher, as it were.
So absolutely, and that's not something in traditional cybersecurity and SOCs that is commonly done. This is the DTEX's approach is the one time I'll plug how we're doing it. We do take a privacy first approach, so we do use a pseudo-anonymization. Now companies can choose to turn it off if they want, but by default we do pseudo-anonymize the data. So what a SOC will see or an insider threat team will see is this user ABC123 has escalated to this level of risk. We think they're a risky user. You might want to do something about it, at which point in time you can have multiple people come in, authenticate to de-anonymize the data, and now they can see, oh, that's Marshall Hielman. Now we can do something about it. But that way we're getting rid of any inherent bias, right? Any of the worries or legality claims that you correctly pointed out. Like when we do business in Europe, from a GDPR perspective, this works for them. Like they love the privacy first aspect. So I think the right way to do it is to use some type of pseudo-anonymization. So you just remove that factor. You just employee privacy is intact until it shouldn't be because they've done something wrong or they're taking certain actions that have escalated them to a level of risk that the company deems intolerable. Sure.
And pseudonymization comes out of my GDPR work, for the record, right?
And here was I thought you were chaining me up perfectly.
Yeah, no. I mean, if we can pseudonymize customers, we should also be able to pseudonymize employees. And frankly, from an investigative standpoint, I don't need to know the real name of the person. Mm-hmm. I need to know, is the data telling the story that is correct? And I can go really deep in an investigation without ever knowing the name of the actual person before I determine, yes, this meets all of the criteria of insider threat. Right?
Exactly.
The four categories as we kind of define them, which category does that fit? I can go very, very, very deep and go, okay, all the signs are here for a category 1, all the signs are here for category 3. This now needs to be promoted to someone who's actually going to take the next steps, whether that's me or someone else. Mm-hmm. And I would argue it probably never should be the same person. It probably should be handed off, right? Uniformed officer versus detective kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
That's well said. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So what are you looking forward to seeing here at Blackhat?
Well, I mean, for me, other than just the random meetings that occur because I run into people I haven't seen, which is invaluable, or just going to an event or dinner and meeting people I haven't met. Like so, let's just say that's something I always look forward to. The other thing I look forward to though is meeting new vendors. So trying to understand, like as I think about the world, I think about it one way based upon my experiences and what I've read about and who I'm talking to. But there are so many people out there that are working in organizations I've never heard of or I'm just not very familiar with. They're thinking about maybe sometimes the same problems from different ways, or thinking about problems I hadn't even thought of. That to me is just so interesting to learn because one, it's a different perspective, but two, no one knows everything in cybersecurity. We know that every 6 months it's like a lifetime passes, right? This is why your single digit comment from beforehand. I didn't even remember. You're right. COVID was only 4 years ago.
Right.
To me, it felt like 8 lifetimes. But it's trying to understand what problems are people solving, why are they trying to solve them, how are they going about it, and just it's that continual learning to see, is there something I can learn from them, right? Is there a way I should be thinking about this? Should I frame a problem I'm talking about a little bit differently, or selfishly, can I enhance my product with something that I heard because I'm like, oh, that is a feature that people need, and this is the place to do that because you talk to some of the smartest people in our industry in not even a daily basis, it's an hourly basis here, right? So for me, it's all about learning.
Yeah, I'm with you there. That is the main reason that I come here, right? Meet new and interesting people, encounter new and interesting problems and new and interesting solutions to those problems, even if they're somewhat incomplete. And in cybersecurity, all of them are incomplete.
I was just going to make a comment like that. No one has solved the problem yet. We're all working towards that.
Pick any problem. You don't even have to pick cybersecurity as a whole, right? There is nothing within cybersecurity that we have solved to 100%.
Correct.
There's no XDR that's perfect, no SIEM that's perfect, no SOAR that's perfect, no anything, right? Much less anything new.
Right.
Identity management is new. People might argue that, but the fact is, if account management was perfect, we wouldn't have needed identity management. We wouldn't have needed to go to this next level. But frankly, that is completely broken because it was never built for security. It was built for operations.
Right.
And it was run by operations and it was managed by operations, right? Today, it's not. It needs to not be. It is a cybersecurity issue.
It is a cybersecurity issue. If you think about the whole Zero Trust initiative, it is about only, not trusting people by default, making sure people only have access to the data and the systems that they absolutely need, and really authenticating you so that you can prove you were who you say you were. All that is great, and like we have solutions for that, but none of them work seamlessly together. None of them work perfectly, and there's still that behavioral context. I can be exactly who I say I am, have authorized access to the data I'm supposed to have access to, and I can still steal it. And that
is true.
That is a security problem right there. And that is an insider problem versus a cybersecurity problem.
And DLP is broken. Data loss prevention is broken. It is such an overwhelmingly complex problem. I'm not sure we have all of the things in place necessary to solve it. Data loss prevention.
I agree. Yep.
Right. That doesn't mean we can't report on it. That doesn't mean we can't investigate it. That doesn't mean we can't discover it. But the prevention, as a complete solution, is still nowhere near
it's
complete.
Not as comprehensive as it needs to be. Like I don't want to knock DLP and say
No, not at all. That's not the point.
It needs to be a tool in your arsenal.
Yep.
But it hasn't lived up to its promise, or the hype, if you will, of we will. DLP, by definition, is there to prevent data from leaving your environment.
Correct.
One of the problems that we see a lot, and to be fair, we have a DLP solution as well, is if I am an intently malicious user, and you have a DLP solution and it blocks me from stealing something, okay, that avenue didn't work. I'm going to try something else and something else and something else until I'm actually able to take that data out, right? Whereas when you're looking at the behavioral aspect of it, you want to look at my behavior. Am I trying to steal the same data in 4 different ways? Well,
right.
That's a problem. You need to come do something about me. Even though DLP effectively stopped me, I'm trying to find other ways to get the data out of the environment. And you want to actually solve the problem, not just say, oh, well, DLP worked.
Well, and if I tried it 4 times and stopped, I probably found a solution.
Exactly.
Right? Like, at some point, the problem is also at some point, I can take a photo with my phone of my own screen. Mm-hmm. Inefficient? Sure. But you know what I can do as the next step? I can then feed that photo right into an LLM and say, turn all of this into machine code.
Yep.
Right? Or transcribe all of the text found on this screenshot.
Yep.
Right? The tools that we have to get around the tools that we have, right, have evolved to a point where they're just, frankly, really insanely good.
Mm-hmm. And as we go into this obviously the AI evolution or revolution, whatever you want to call it, take the example you just gave, you could actually just video record the screen as you're scrolling through everything
for sure.
The entire day, feed it to an LLM, and a couple minutes later, have every single piece of data you saw throughout the entire day, however you're handling it, and you have access to that.
Yeah, for sure.
That's scary.
It's really scary. I will say one of the things we may be able to do to mitigate some of it is get far better at assigning value and risk to the data. I would argue that most of our data we misclassify. And we probably ratchet the risk up too high in most places and too low in some. Mm-hmm. Right? The reality of the situation is, I think we call things IP that are not IP entirely too frequently, right? Which means we have to take a really broad focus on prevention, and it defocuses us, it deprioritizes. To your point when you first started, right? If this is a top 5 priority, and it's not funded as a top 5 priority, then we really need to be able to focus on those places where that priority should lie, and that cannot be absolutely everywhere all the time, mm-hmm. right? It has to be what's our top risk, what are the top places, and can we really ratchet down the controls we have over that, rather than try to ratchet down the controls we have over absolutely everything.
Absolutely, and it's a great point because to take the conversation a slightly different avenue. If you think of it, the majority of organizations don't have unlimited budgets to spend on cybersecurity or insider threat, right? So it really behooves them to figure out what are their critical assets, right? So systems, data, and people. What is their risk tolerance or the risk profile? So really, how much money do they need to spend to get to the point where they feel like they've got their risk covered in a way that's acceptable for them, mm-hmm. right? At that point in time, that's the amount of money to spend. That's what their security program should be. So to your point, if most organizations have too much sensitive intellectual property they can't stand to lose, they're probably looking at the wrong way unless they have one of those unlimited budgets. So it behooves them to slim down and say, okay, this is the data we really care about, so let's focus our time, efforts, and money on protecting this data here. Everything else, we accept the fact that it'll be lost at some point in time, or it's okay if it happens. And that seems like a more realistic approach. And I will say, from my experience over the last 5 years or so, I've seen a number of companies in the cybersecurity space start to take that more mature look at what is our risk profile, what is the appropriate amount of money to be spending for me, and not just overspending to buy all the tools, right? And from the insider threat space, we haven't gotten to that point yet because it's just not quite as mature of an industry yet, because it's only now becoming something that, as a CISO says, it's in their top 5 priorities. We're starting to see get a little bit more funding, building programs, and so forth.
For sure. Yeah, that's a really good point. So if you're a CISO where that's, let's say it's maybe it is, maybe it isn't your top 5 priority, but it is a priority, you find you don't have funding, right? So you kind of have to get started with how do I manage some low-hanging fruit? What are some things I can do where maybe I don't have funding to do a larger program, but I want to show results, because as a CISO, that's also a great way to loosen up some funding, right? Be able to show, hey, I was able to do the top 5 things. It's a lot of work, but I was able to do it. Here's the benefit. If I could do the next 5 things, the benefit will be Y, right? What are those 5 things that you would start with tomorrow for CISOs?
Yeah, I'll give you 2 right off the bat.
Great.
One of my friends implemented their own program that I thought worked, just absolutely fantastic. What he did was, it was a very similar problem. He wanted more budget for cybersecurity and for insider threats, is really just across the board. And so what he did was, he got his CFO to sign off on a quantifiable dollar amount for certain types of intellectual property. So he's able to say, if we lose this particular piece of data, it's $10, or whatever the metric was, right? And from there, he leveraged the tools he had available to look at the people that he knew were most likely to take data, which are people leaving the company, called known leavers, right?
Sure.
And so it's like, okay, if we have 100 people that leave the company a year, I'm going to do an investigation on all 100 of them. And so that's what he did, and he was able to come back and start quantifying the value of his program. Hey, I just saved you $15 million. I'm asking for $500,000 for a new tool. That makes sense, right? The ROI there is it's obvious.
It's tangible.
It's
right?
tangible, right?
And it's a multiplier that any CFO would sign off on.
Exactly. And it's one of those things where that's very difficult for organizations to do. And I recognize you have to have a very mature program to get to that point in time, and and an executive team that's willing to actually quantify the data the way
Sure.
they did. But that is one way that not only does it work, but I've seen it work, right? It's been fantastic. Another way, again, is to look forward to your point about results. Right now, like we talked about beforehand, having an employee that's not working very hard because they have multiple jobs, or an employee who's farming their job out to someone else, wherever they may be, right? Those are things that you can catch, right? They're with cybersecurity software, with insider threat software, you can catch the type of activity. And if that's happening in the majority of organizations, all you have to do is catch 1 or 2 employees, and the program's not paid for itself. You can go back and show your executives, your boss, hey, look what we just saved. You had a malicious employee here. We caught him and fired him, got rid of him. Aren't you happy about that? So I think that's another very easy way to leverage tools you already have to help gain funding. As a matter of fact, I actually I wrote a blog that's being released tomorrow on how to get executive buy-in and funding for insider threat programs, where we kind of go through why is it a problem, why should executives care, how do you talk to executives, and what do you do to actually get funding for your program. And so just a little bit of plug there that literally this topic I was just talking about.
So how does someone find that blog?
If you go to the DTEX blog, it'll be posted
Okay.
Wednesday morning. So actually, by the time people are watching this podcast, it'll be
That's true.
It'll
That's
be
true.
posted. Yeah.
So find that on the DTEX blog.
Exactly.
Awesome. How can people get a hold of you, learn more? Where should they go?
Yeah. So anyone can reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's easy. Anyone can also call in or reach out to anyone at DTEX and get a hold of me. If you want to learn more about insider threat, it's a fascinating topic. I would challenge anyone who loves cybersecurity, just the way I did throughout my entire career, to take a look at it. It's such a fascinating topic that's a different take on the same problem, if you will. That for those, for most people in our industry, love to learn. They love new challenges. They want to tackle things right. This is a challenge that needs to be tackled and is really exciting. And so I would challenge people to go to the DTEX website, go to our blog. We have a team called I3. They do investigations and intelligence, just like you think of the intelligence firms in the cybersecurity space. We just do it for insider threat. Read up on like Robert Hansen, Edward Snowden, those cases, and actually read about what actually happened, not just the headlines and what was in the news, but the stories behind what happened. Robert Hansen is a fascinating story because they couldn't figure out who he was for a while. So many people were basically presumed guilty while they're trying to figure this out. I personally know someone whose career was affected and actually ended because he was caught up in that entire investigation. And so, to your point about being right when you're going after someone, I do know someone whose career was ended because of that. It's tough, and it's something he talks about quite frequently because it's just such a crazy story for those of us who weren't involved and haven't done counterintelligence for our entire careers to hear that yes, this stuff does actually happen. Here's how it actually affects people. So it's a fascinating topic.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it's also far more. I think there's more stories out there than people realize as well, right?
Especially in the federal government, a lot of the incidents are classified, so they can't talk about them.
Sure.
So it's like the ones you're reading about are the ones that just happen to be on the unclassified and they're willing to talk about. Like you said, there are. I mean, there were three from last year that I can think of off the top of my head.
Well, and then on the private sector, right? I was in e-discovery for a decade.
There you go.
Right, we had a ton of cases that were intellectual property theft, right? 100% insider threat. There was very, very, very few of those that I would say were external threats. They were almost always someone that had access to information left and took that information to a competitor. Right, it happens all the time, and the investigations are complex. Right now, granted, for most of that 10 years, none of these tools existed. Right, and so it was really kind of a traditional computer forensic investigation to go back and put the pieces together. There really was no one had systems in place that were really good at alerting those things, finding those things, identifying those things, right? The difference that's happened in a decade in the amount of compute power that we have available to us, the storage we have available to us, the data science tools necessary to do the analytics to put all this together and link all these different kind of data points together and create a story is a night and day difference.
Absolutely, it saves so much time. Now, with the AI evolution we're going through, it's going to condense the amount of time we're currently taking to something significantly smaller in the future, and I'm really excited to see where it takes us.
I'm both excited and concerned. Right? I'm very excited, but the hype cycle is so great, and the pressure to incorporate AI is so great. I'm really worried about eroding trust.
There's that. As you know, a lot of companies rush to have some kind of AI capability, whether it was functionally useful or not, right? And I don't want to pick on anyone because I think every company did it, right? But it's just we think this is a good idea. We can leverage AI for it. Let's go and release this. And without the type of customer testing you would have expected. And so I think we're seeing a little bit of backlash there, where now AI is a little bit of a joke, just because every company has some type of AI, and you have to figure out, is the AI integration really worthwhile? Is it really enhancing the product? Is it something that's really worth paying for or not?
Right. I would say most of it's useless. I would say most of it's too early. We're at the experimentation phase with all of this stuff.
We are.
It's evolving so rapidly, and most of what I see is either a weak lift, as in it doesn't really solve a problem, it replaces a person in a way that they shouldn't have been replaced, or it wasn't really well understood when it was implemented, and the results that you get back are poor at best.
So I'll say I disagree a little bit, but I'm also biased now. Having spent after the Mandiant acquisition, I spent a year at Google Cloud Security, so I got in-depth indoctrination into how they do it. My current company leverages AI in ways that I think are useful, but I actually want to pivot out of that for a minute.
Well, I would say that those two examples in a space that's greater than 30,000 software products, right? Like,
True.
you know, I'm not saying
That's fair.
everyone does it poorly, but the majority of what I'm seeing is not extremely well thought out, extremely pointed, extremely purposeful.
Yeah.
There are a few really good use cases that I have seen, but I'm seeing an awful lot of, see, we have AI too, and you go, well, that's not really what you should be doing, you know. And then the implementations are not, they don't really have anything to do with software vendors necessarily.
Fair.
Right, I'm seeing a lot of implementations. The Ford dealership where their chatbot was convinced to sell Tesla, the Ford dealership where their chatbot was convinced to sell Fisker, I think.
Fisker, okay.
The Chevy chatbot that was convinced to sell a Tahoe for $1.
I
Air
saw that,
Canada,
yeah.
where their chatbot hallucinated a bereavement policy completely.
Mhm.
I don't know if you followed that. That was my favorite.
So that one I didn't follow.
So effectively, somebody had a bereavement. They went to buy a ticket and decided to reach out beforehand to say, hey, what's your bereavement policy? Thankfully, they were smart enough to screenshot it.
Mhm.
They saved it. They then submitted for reimbursement according to the policy they were given, to which the response was, that's not a real policy. And they went, here's all the screenshots, like it's your chatbot that told me this, and they said, we don't care. The customer sued. The Canadian court ruled in favor of the customer. Of course, Air Canada tried to say, well, it's not our fault, it's the AI chatbot maker's fault. To which the court said, ha ha ha, funny, it's absolutely your fault, your chatbot, your choice. Now what I'd like you to do, this made international news. They had to pay the cost of the ticket, the bereavement thing, plus court fees and attorney's fees and whatever else. Guess what the cost of the ticket was? They took this to court. $800 Canadian. I don't understand why you would risk any reputational damage whatsoever for $800 Canadian. Plus, the court also ruled that you are responsible for the chatbot that you implemented.
Mhm.
So there is now precedent for that ruling. So I don't understand how you helped yourself in any way, shape, or form for $800.
Right. I will say, I mean, in this particular case, I like the ruling because I do think you, like, as an organization, you are responsible.
No, I 100% agree with the ruling.
Yeah. What I will say though, like chatbot is one of the examples I was giving where it's like, you know, in a lot of cases are not entirely well thought out. At least for me, when I talk to customer service, chatbots, I understand they can be helpful. I'd much rather talk to a person.
100%.
It's just easier because chatbots are great when everything goes perfect, right? It simplifies things. But the moment you veer a little bit off the standard path, then you just want to talk to a human.
Well, and I think we're using chatbots for the wrong purpose, right? Like if you have a standard answer, a chatbot should get you to the standard answer faster than a human.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The problem is the onboarding and offboarding aren't being set up properly. The offboarding should be, this is a non-standard question. I don't understand it. Send them to a human.
Mhm.
Right? And we're not doing that. Instead, what we're doing is we're going, hey, can we just replace all our humans with this, or a way too large percentage of humans with this? No, you can't. You don't understand it well enough. Right? Knock it off. Your A/B testing has obviously failed. I have yet to see any of these work out really well for folks. At the same time, if it is working out really well for a company, maybe we wouldn't hear about it.
That is true.
Right.
Yeah, we are. I think the term is armchair quarterbacking, right? Like
For sure.
I've never implemented a chat, and
For sure.
I haven't had to. But I guess the other aspect of this is you have to have technology get rolled out. It has to not work very well. You learn, you evolve, and it's kind of like if you think about 20 years ago, cell phones weren't really a thing. Most people weren't walking around and having internet connectivity and the ability to call people at all points in time or on the phone, right? So maybe 5 years from now, we're going to look back and say, why did humans ever answer the phone? Of course you talk to a chatbot, right? I think this is the evolution we have to go through to get to that point.
I mean, 10 years ago, I think we all made phone calls by default. Maybe a little more than 10 years, 15 years. Now, I don't want to talk to anybody. If you can't handle it by text, what in the heck are you doing in today's day and age, right? Like, so there's an evolution of expectation that I think is also going to follow us and evolve. I really hope that this one is one where we don't face too much regressive backlash, right? Because oftentimes when we make a leap of adoption without thinking about it, right? The kind of ready, fire, aim scenario, which I kind of feel like we're a little bit in. And I hope people pull back just a little bit. I just want people to learn. I just want people to think a little bit, further down the path before they kind of jump in with both feet, as it were.
Especially because of the the societal impact from how we leverage AI is so huge. It's almost unprecedented. And so, like you said, as we're rushing ahead and trying to forge new paths, we don't entirely understand what we're doing. It's just there are risks.
100%. 100%, right? And the investment is very, very low
Right.
to replace people.
Right.
And that's the other thing, right? We have a responsibility to people that they are able to survive and live and grow and evolve. And we can be a little bit sociopathic in our willingness to replace people, and I think we also need to be really cautious of that.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, this has been a lot of fun.
It has been fun, yeah. Nice wide-ranging chat. I love it.
I feel like I met a new friend here at DEF CON and Blackhat that I didn't expect, so this has been fantastic.
Same. This is why we come.
This is exactly why we come. Well, this has been another episode of Discovering Disruptions in Tech. Please like, subscribe, follow, share, comment, reach out, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.